Hello everybody. In today's video we are going to talk about histograms and frequency polygons. These are just two ways to visually represent a frequency distribution. So let's start off. We're going to talk first about histograms. So a histogram, a couple big things we need to remember. The x-axis or the horizontal axis is labeled with our numerical scores or classes. So that's that very first column of our frequency distribution. That should be our x-axis. The y-axis is your frequency. It should start at 0 and be consistently labeled. So that means if you're going to label every point 1, 2, 3, then that should be, but you could also label it where you're labeling it by 5s or 10s. It just depends on your data. It should be consistent, however, and we'll talk about that as we do some examples here in just a second. For each value or class, you want to draw a bar that can correspond to the frequency or the amount of times that particular frequency for that particular class. Each bar should have the same width and extend halfway between the corresponding values, the real limits. There should be no gaps between the bars. We want to make sure that they're evenly spaced. This is one of the ways that we want to make sure that our graph is accurately representative and we're not trying to skew our, make our data look like it's not. Just one of the things a lot of people do when presenting information to the public is they skew and make the data look incorrect. So let's talk about this first histogram. Again, we're going to use that number of pets for 52 families that we did in our first video for this chapter. So we've got our frequency distribution here. We've got our 0 through 6 pets and then our frequencies for each one of those. So along the x-axis or the horizontal axis, we're going to put the number of pets. So we've got our 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Along the y-axis or the vertical axis, we are going to do our frequencies. In this case, I'm labeling the frequencies just 0 through or 0, 5, 10, 15, and 20 instead of labeling them 1, 2, 3, 4. It just makes it a little easier and a little prettier to look at. So for our first frequency, we've got our 16. So our number of pets were 0. Families that had 0 pets, I'm just going to draw my bar up to 16. So now for our number of pets being 1, we had 15 families, so we're going to draw our bar up to 15. Notice that the bars for the 0 and the 1 are actually touching and they are the exact same width. Okay, same thing for number of pets being 2, we had 13 families. For 3, we had 5 families. For 4 pets, we had 1 family. For 5 pets, we had 1 family. And for 6 pets, we had 1 family. So this would be what my histogram would look like for the number of household pets for 52 families. Okay. So let's look at one for a histogram. So the following data are the number of calls per day for a company. So again, along the x-axis, we're going to put the number of calls per day. And what we're going to use are those classes. Okay, so I've got 10 to 19, 20 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, 50 to 59, and then 60 to 69, 70 to 79. And again, along the vertical axis, we're going to do our frequencies. Since we're only looking at numbers from 3 to 8, we can label those just 1 through 10, since we're not having a whole lot of data going on here like we did on the previous one where we had numbers from 1 to 16. So for our 10 to 19, we had 6 calls, or 6 days that had those calls. Let's just make our chart. For 20 to 29, we had 8. For 30 to 39, we had 5. For 40 to 49, we had 4. For 50 to 59, we had 3. For 60 to 69, we had 5. And for 70 to 79, we had 4. And again, noticing that those bars are the exact same width and they all touch each other. That's one of the biggest things about doing a histogram is your bars need to touch and they need to be the exact same width. Okay, so a frequency polygon, it's just another way to represent data. So the x-axis again is labeled with our numerical scores, our class intervals. The y-axis is our vertical axis is our frequencies. Again, we want to start at 0 and be consistent on our labeling, so we're not really changing anything about the way we set up the frequency polygon from the histogram. The difference is we're going to place a dot at the frequency of each score, or for our scores like when we have just a plain number, but if we're working with a class like our phone calls, we would need to do it at the midpoint, which is the high plus the low score of a class divided by 2, and I will show you how that looks here when we do our second example. And then we're going to place a dot before the first score and after the last score. This is called grounding the frequency polygon, so that will be grounded at 0. And then we're going to draw our line to connect them. Okay, so again, my frequency polygon setup looks exactly like my histogram setup, with one difference. I'm going to add a value lower than 0, so that would be -1, and I would add a value higher than 6, which is 7. Those are going to be my grounding values. So I'm going to put a dot at -1, 0, because that's my grounding. And now we're going to put a dot at 16. Oops, I'm sorry. We're also going to put a dot at 7, 0. Now I'm going to put a dot at 16 for my first frequency for 0 pets. And then I'm going to draw a line between -1 and the 0, or the 16. We're going to put a dot for the number of pets being 1 at 15, and again drawing that line. And we're just going to continue on that way for 2 pets, that's at 13, so we'll put that dot and draw our line. For 3 pets, that was at 5, again drawing our line. 4 pets, we had 1. 5 pets, we had 1. 6 pets, we had 1. And then again, when we get to the end, we're grounding our frequency polygon, so we're drawing that from 6 to 7 down to our x-axis. Whenever we do a frequency polygon, we always want to make sure to ground it on both sides, one below and one above. Okay, so now to do a frequency polygon when we're doing a group frequency, before we even start this, let's go ahead and find our midpoints for each of our classes. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to take our high value and our low value for each class, and we're going to divide it by 2. So that means we're going to take 10 plus 19 and divide that by 2. So we'd have 29 divided by 2, should give us 14.5. Okay, so that's going to be my midpoint for that first class. And I'm going to do that through each one of these classes. So 20 plus 29 would give me 49 divided by 2, which give me 24.5. I'm going to continue on. So for 30 to 39, we get 34.5. For 40 to 49, we get 44.5. For 50 to 59, we get 54.5. For 60 to 69, we get 64.5. And lastly, for 70 to 79, we get 74.5. Now, one thing I hope you notice between these is notice that the difference between 24.5 and 14.5 is 10. And the difference between 24.5 and 34.5 is 10. If you'll remember from our previous video, the class width for this particular grouped frequency was 10. And if you'll notice that the distance between my midpoints is the same as my class width. So you can do a little bit of cheating on here. If you figure out your first midpoint at 14.5, you could just add 10 all the way down, since that's your class width, and get each of your following midpoints. So also that makes it easy to find the midpoint for my previous class, which is not listed here, and my class above 70 to 79. So to find this 4.5, all I have to do is take this 14.5 and subtract 10. And all I have to do to find the 84.5, the one above it, is to take the 74.5 and add 10. That's how I get those, so I can ground my frequency polygon. Remember, grounding it means that I'm going to put a dot at 0 and 4.5. Next, we're going to put a dot at 6 and 14.5 and draw my line. The next frequency for class 2 is 8, and that's for the 24.5. Again, drawing my line. My next frequency for 34.5 was 5. For 44.5, it was 4. For 54.5, it was 3. For 64.5, it was 5. For 74.5, it was 4. And for 84.5, that's my grounding again, so I'm going to go back down to the x-axis, put a dot there, and draw my line. And there is my frequency polygon for a grouped frequency. Hopefully this helped you guys figure out how to draw histograms and frequency polygons. If you have any questions or need another example, please make sure to email me.